Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see you all here today, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kayla, and we're going to take a look today at 360 renderings. We do have a number of other staff on with us today, so they're here to help me out and make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So we're going to begin with a planned presentation that'll be about 20 minutes long. During that time, feel free to chat in any questions that you have, and one of my coworkers would be happy to help to answer those for you. Then after the presentation, we'll go ahead and open it up for live questions. So you can raise your hand, unmute your mic when you're called on, and ask your question. You'll find all of those options. So to chat in a question, raise your hand, you'll find all of them in the GoToWebinar control panel. This session is being recorded, so we'll send out a link to the recording afterwards so you can watch it again at your leisure. So now let's go ahead and get started, and we'll jump into today's presentation.
We're going to begin by taking a look at our camera settings. In particular, the camera placement and lighting options to effectively set up the scene for our 360 image. Then we'll take a look at the export options, followed by how you can then share the 360 with your clients, so some different options for that. And finally, we'll take a look at a new feature in X13 that will help you to do a 360 exterior walkthrough video going around the outside of the home. So we're going to just jump right into the program. I'm going to start out in X12, and we'll jump into X13 a little bit later. So to create a 360, we're going to need to first have a camera view to then export from. So I'm going to take a look at our camera options. We have our camera view tools right here. We're going to start just by looking at our full camera. So to place a full camera, we're going to click and drag in the direction that we would like to look. And that will open up our camera view, and it brings us right into our mouse orbit camera, so we can rotate around. For a 360, we want to be able to see what's going on behind the camera. So I'm just going to rotate my camera. You can see it's taking me outside of the room. And the reason for that, if we take a look at our plan view, is that my camera is here, and what we call a focal point is out here in the center of this living room area. The focal point is going to be the rotation point. So when I use my mouse orbit camera, that's what I'm rotating around. I'm rotating around about this spot where that focal point is. So instead, I'm going to select the camera, grab this focal point, and just pull it right over top of the camera. That way I can simulate what it's going to look like when I export the 360 view. So when I rotate around, I'm standing in place. And that will just help me to see if I have any barriers or if the angle isn't right in any direction, so I can move the camera around. I can tell by rotating around that I'm actually a little high off the ground. So I'm going to push down on my scroll wheel, which will allow me to pan around, and I'm just going to pull up to move closer to the floor, a little bit closer to where you would be standing. So now when I rotate around, I can see lower into the room. And I'm not as concerned about the direction that I'm looking in the plan, because I will be able to rotate all around and look up and down. However, this is the view that the client's going to see first. When they first open up the image, whatever direction you're looking at when you export the camera, that's the first thing they're going to see. So we don't want to be looking at a wall or looking at something that's not important to the space. So I'm going to start by looking at the living room, and then the client can rotate around to look at the kitchen. So the next thing that I need to pay attention to is the rendering technique that I'm using. So right now I'm using what we call just our standard rendering technique. And we can export this view using any of the rendering techniques. So to take a look at them, I'm going to select my rendering techniques right here. You can see the full list. We're in standard. So we can use a vector view, which is going to be the underlying patterns of images. It's what you would see typically in an elevation view. We can use glass house, sometimes for kitchen views in particular. That can be effective, where we can look into cabinets, and for a 360 view, sometimes it's helpful when you can see into other rooms and see how the full space is coming together. Then we have duotone, technical illustration. We have a painting in watercolor. You can do a line drawing. And then we're going to go ahead and use what we call our physically based rendering technique. So this is going to be a more photorealistic image. So I'm going to swap over to that. So this is a more photorealistic image, but obviously it does use some very different lighting effects. So what we're going to need to do is just make a couple of adjustments to our lighting. So the first is actually in the technique option itself. So this last option here is not a rendering technique, but it's a way for us to edit our rendering techniques. So I'm going to open those. I'm going to select to improve the lighting quality, which is going to increase the number of calculations that the program is doing for the lighting. And then I'm going to up the brightness. So I'll bring this up to maybe 90 rather than 0, which as you can see is going to make the room significantly brighter. Then I'm going to need to adjust the lights that are turned on and the sun. So those are both contained under these camera view lighting tools. I'm going to select that, and I'll start with the sunlight. Right now my sunlight is set at 10,000 lumens for a physically based render so we don't get a washed out backdrop. I'm going to drop it down to just 1,000. And I can also adjust the angle at which the sunlight is coming in. I'm not too worried about that for this image. Select OK and it'll refresh the image. So now I just want to make sure that all of the lights for the scene are turned on. So also under my camera view lighting tools, there's adjust lights. Right now we're using just a maximum number of lights of 20, so the program is going to grab the 20 nearest lights that it can find. I'm going to switch over to using a particular light set, and I've already set one up. This is just a set of lights so that I can say all of the lights in this great room scene need to be turned on. Now that we've made some adjustments, it's a good idea to just rotate around again. Just take a look at the full scene. Make sure that the lighting is working in every angle, that we're not missing any pieces. We're not going to be working on materials today, but we also would want to just pay attention to all of the materials in the space. Make sure that they also are matching how we want them to look. We're just going to take one last overview before we do the export. So now, to export this image, I'm going to go to File, Export, and we're going to export a 360 panorama. So first we need to say how large this image is going to be, and if you are going to be adjusting the width and height, I do recommend that you limit the dimensions to the power of 2, so just keep that checked. It just keeps everything in proportion. And then we need to decide, are we going to just save the image directly onto the disk? So that would be saving it onto the computer in your documents or onto your desktop, in your photos, wherever you typically would save those. Or are we going to save into the Chief Architect Cloud? So this saves it actually into your account on our website, where you can then log in to manage the image, and we're going to take a look at what that looks like here in just a second. So if you do decide to save it to the cloud, you'll need to give it a name. If you decide to save it to the disk, you'll need to browse out and choose a folder. If you're going to save multiple images, you may need to give a description as well. So if you made an update to a 360 and you're sending an update, maybe you just include a description of what changed there. So I'm going to just call this our Whitman Living 360. And I'm not going to save it onto the disk, I'm just going to save it onto the cloud. So it'll ask me to go ahead and log in. I'm not going to log in right now, but I am going to open up my account because I've already exported this image that we're going to take a look at. So here I've opened up our website, chiefarchitect.com, logged into my account and selected the option for 360 panoramas, which shows all of the panoramas that I have exported so that I can view or manage them. So I'm going to you can see I've already exported this 360 of the living room. We have two options initially. You can view it or you can make it public. When I select to make it public, it refreshed the page and now I have an option to share it. When I select to share it, here is the link that I can just send directly to the customer. They can open it up just like any other website and view the image. There's also an email that you can already pre-designed that you can send, so you can just copy this into an email or you can send it directly from here. And then there's this option to embed. So this would be if you want the 360 image on your website. So just like when you're scrolling through other images, you can actually use this as a 360. Your clients or prospective clients can see some of the design work that you've done. This is the HTML code that you can use in order to add that in there. So if you want to see what this is going to look like, you can click on View, and this is exactly what it will look like for your client. You can then rotate around, see the full image. You can even look up and down. So this is a really easy and effective way for the client to get a good grasp of the space without you needing to be right in front of them with the program. And if you would like to share these onto a social media platform like Facebook, you're actually usually going to upload the flat image itself. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. And again, to do that, you'd go to File, Export, Export 360, and instead of saving to the cloud, we would choose to save it to the disk. Browse out and choose a folder. So I have also already exported this image. So here I have this picture, and you can see when flattened it looks a little psychedelic at first. This is just what a 360 image looks like when you flatten it. If you upload this to Facebook, it will be able to read it. You can then rotate around just like you can on our website. There are a number of other 360 viewers as well, where when they look at this image, they'll read it as a 360 and you'll be able to rotate just as you can in the preview that we were just looking at. So those work really well for doing an interior 360. It doesn't usually work as well for doing an exterior. The reason being you're going to be rotating around, and while you're rotating around you're going to spend a lot of your time looking at the backdrop as opposed to the front of the home. There are times, and I do have an example here, of an exterior 360 that does work okay. So I have a farm scene that's set up here. But the reason why this image works is because there's quite a lot going on in the back of this home. So there's a lot for us to look at as we rotate around. You can see quite a small portion of that 360 is spent actually looking at the home itself. So if I didn't have a whole farm scene behind there, the exterior 360 wouldn't be as much to look at. But there are some backyard scenes if you're doing a lot of landscaping where that still could work out well. But I'm going to show you another option for how we can do an exterior 360. This time we're going to do it as a walkthrough, so it's going to be a video as opposed to a 360 image. And we're going to open up X13 because we have a new option to make this easier. So typically when we're creating a walkthrough, we have a couple of different options to be able to begin creating the path that we're then going to record the walkthrough. So under the 3D menu, you can see our walkthrough options. You can just create a walkthrough path. So this is a spline-based object. You can just click and drag to create a path around the home. So you can actually just click and drag around the outside of the home, select the line, and you can see we have our different cameras here. So we can rotate the camera to face the home, and the camera will stay at that angle as it follows the line. Another option is to create a walkthrough path using just our CAD tools. So you can use even just a circle and draw a circle around the home and convert it over. So a 2D CAD line can be converted to a number of different 3D objects. One of the options to convert is a walkthrough path. So you can use any of the 2D CAD options that we have to create that walkthrough path. Using the circle is one way that you can do it. An easier way in X13 is for us to start by just creating a camera view. So I'm going to select my camera options like I did before, but instead of full camera, we're going to do a perspective full overview. So this camera type places us outside of the home, looking down. We can use the orbit to rotate around. And if we go back to the plan view, you can see we have the camera sitting here, and the focal point is right in the center of the drawing. The overall drawing place, the focal point is going to be placed in the center. You can move that around if you want to move it into a particular place. And as we rotate around, you can see we're staying outside the home, rotating around that focal point. In X13, we can now create a walkthrough path from this camera. So under the 3D menu, if we go down to walkthroughs, you can see there's an option here to create an orbital walkthrough path. If I come back to the plan view and I go to that option, so under 3D walkthroughs, notice that it is grayed out. So this is something that you either need to be in a camera view to begin with, or if you select the camera itself, there is an option in the edit toolbar to create that walkthrough path. So if I select that, you can see it created a large circle around the home. So the camera sits right on the edge of where that circle is. The distance from the camera to the focal point will wind up being the radius of the circle. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. And in my camera view, I'm going to just zoom in a bit. And then we'll go back to the plan view. So you can see we're much closer to the home. And now I'm going to create that walkthrough path. You can see it created a much smaller circle because we had a smaller radius from the focal point to the camera. And now we have another new option under walkthroughs. So under the 3D menu, walkthroughs, we can actually see a preview of the walkthrough before we record it. So that's going to open up a side window and we can see a preview of what that walkthrough is going to look like. If we select this option, we can actually move the frame so we can see as we go through this walkthrough, what is it going to look like at every angle of the path. Now obviously one thing that I can see here and in the camera view that I was in earlier is that the image is pretty dark. So we're going to need to again take a look at some of our lighting options. We don't need to worry about taking a look at adjusting the lights. There's not really any exterior lights in this home, but I do want to adjust my sunlight. And to adjust the sunlight for the walkthrough, we're going to go ahead and adjust the default sunlight. So I'm going to open up my default settings, which is this option right here, my little wrench tool. Then I'm going to look at my 3D view defaults and my sunlight. And we're set at that 1000 lumens that we set inside. I'm going to up that to 100,000 lumens, which is typical for an exterior sunny day. And I'm going to make sure that this option is checked for the sun to follow the camera, which as we're rotating around the house, I just don't want there to be any large glaring shadows. I want for the sun to always be shining on the house as we're rotating around. So you can see it updated the sunlight in my walkthrough as I go along. It's a little hard to notice on there, but the sun is following, so we can continue seeing the sun hitting the home as we rotate. And then once we go to record, so I'm going to just select the option here to record the walkthrough. And we can take a look at the camera options just to make sure. So I'm going to select define. I do want my shadows to be turned on, so I'm going to check that. And if we wanted to, we could select to hide the camera facing exterior walls. So that means that as we were rotating around this model, we would actually see into the home, but almost like a dollhouse where you have the front walls removed, and then as you rotate to the side, we would have the side walls removed. It's a great option if you want them to be able to really get an idea of how the space is coming together. And there is an option for backdrop as well. I'm not going to have a backdrop, but there are some great backdrop images you can work with. So if you go to select a backdrop, we have in the core catalog, and then we also have a bonus catalog of them available on our website. So then I'll select OK, and to record the walkthrough, there also is a particular resolution. A typical HD monitor is going to be 1920 by 1080. The larger the size that you use, the longer it can take to produce the video. But again, 1920 by 1080 is going to be the large resolution to make sure that you have a nice crisp video. Frames per second. When we're recording a walkthrough, basically what it is it's a series of camera snapshots that are taken as the camera moves along the line. And those camera shots are all strung together to create the video. The more frames per second you have, the smoother that video is going to be. So 15 is a fairly low number. I will typically use 30, but again, the more frames per second that you do, the more camera snapshots it's going to have to take, and the longer the recording can take. This is why the preview is so handy, so we can see what we're going to be recording before we actually hit that record button. So then we would select OK, we would need to go ahead and name it, and it would open up the camera view and start recording. I'm going to cancel out of there. I'm not going to actually start the recording. I've actually already recorded this and have a version saved, so we'll just open that up and take a look. So here's the final product, a 360 view of the exterior of the home. So whether you need to do an exterior or an interior view, 360 renderings, whether exporting a photo or recording a video, can really help you to effectively showcase the home.
All right, so now we're going to switch gears and we're going to go ahead and take some live questions. So if you do have a question, remember in the GoToMeeting control panel, you can raise your hand. My coworker Carrie will call on you. Make sure you unmute your mic so we can hear you. And Carrie, do we have any questions?
We do. We have Anne Marie. Hi, Anne Marie. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Perfect, thanks. This was really cool. The pod light settings before the PBR, can you share what those might have been?
Yes, so let's take a look here. I usually have different settings depending upon whether I'm doing a PBR or a standard. I do PBR far more often than I do anything else. So these are set for a physical based rendering. And I do have them set right now to 1200 lumens. One thing to keep in mind with regards to light, especially in a physically based render, is that it's going to all be relative to each other. So if you have every light in your home set at 1200 lumens, they're all going to have a similar effect on the scene. So when you want one light to have a brighter effect than any other, you'll need to have it at a higher luminosity or lower all of the others.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
We have Laura here with a question.
Hi, everybody. Questions. Number one, I don't know if I missed this, but that in the actual walkthrough, not the panorama, that wasn't a physically based, was it? And if it wasn't, is that available for the walkthrough?
It is available for the walkthrough. I don't typically use that for an exterior. It's just not very well set up for an exterior view. You can do, there are some ways that you can kind of enhance the standard. But yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend using a physically based render for an exterior one just because it uses a different lighting model. So it doesn't look the same way that it does for an interior view.
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking for an interior walkthrough. I don't know.
For an interior walkthrough, absolutely, you can use a physically based render.
Okay, and then the other question that I had was, last time I was doing this, I know this is supposed to adjust automatically when you are going up a step. I had a small step into the front door, and it was not adjusting, and I could not get it adjusted no matter what I did to make it look like it was just a smooth transition into the front door. Do you have any tips for that?
You know, the only thing I can think is that if it wasn't an actual step, so if it's something like this, where the program is not seeing it necessarily as a step up, that could possibly be what's happening, but it should still be adjusting based on your floor height. If it is an actual step, then bringing the camera exactly right up to the edge of the step is the way that the program kind of gauges the fact that you're going upstairs. So I would just pull it back and then try and hit that step again and see if it works. Otherwise, tech support is always a good resource to take a look at what might be going on there.
Okay, I think I actually used like a polyline solid to make it. Does that not see it as a step if that's the case?
Yeah, it won't see that as a step, and it's not going to see it as floor either. So you would have to manually adjust the height of your camera as you go up that polyline solid. Using an actual stair is the best way for the program to gauge that it is a stair.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Kayla, I have Rick Thurlby here. Hi, Rick. Go ahead and ask your question.
A couple questions I have. We have the physically based rendering. Is there a way to get a higher resolution than that?
A higher resolution from within the program or when you go to export?
When you go to export.
When you go to export, you should be able to set the resolution. There's a predetermined number. So let me just take a look here. So you're asking when we go to File, Export, and export a 360 panorama like we've done?
Mm-hmm.
So you should be able to adjust the panorama size here. If you were looking when we were doing the walkthrough, I think there's some kind of predetermined resolutions for that particular one, but this dialog, I think you should be able to go theoretically as large as you want to, although the larger the image, the longer it's going to take to export. So there may be a plateau there.
Okay, so there's not a way to get it more of a photorealistic.
The photorealism usually is going to come into the way that you're handling the physically based render settings themselves.
Okay.
And then the resolution is just going to be a piece of that, at least as far as my experience has been. Does anyone have anything to add to that? Any of our other chief architect staff members?
Hey, Rick, this is Scott.
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
You can always ray trace in this view, and that's going to be possibly a higher resolution than the physically based. And
Well, would it still be a 360?
sure,
Oh, okay.
yeah. And you just switch it over, and when you do the ray trace, there's an option in here that Kayla's opening up, and you just generate that as a 360 panorama. And just remember, these images are about 4 times
Right.
wider than a normal one, so I usually increase it quite a bit. But yeah, sure, ray trace it.
Okay. My other question is with the model, when you generate a model that can be shared,
Okay.
Every time I go to share it, I have to give people instructions to go under the rendering techniques and change it from basic to standard, so that you get a much more realistic look. Is there a reason for the basic? Can we just get rid of that and just have the standard? I mean, every time I have to do that, and then they ask, how do we do this?
Yeah, so the reason why we have that is because some models, depending upon internet speed of the person that's opening it, and some other settings, it can take a really long time to open that image. So we've kind of determined that we would rather just get an image or the model up, so you can see it, and then you can swap that over. I don't know, Scott may have more to add to that, but that's kind of some of the reasoning behind it, is just to make sure that it's going to load, you're going to be able to see it, and navigate around even if you have fairly low speeds.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, every one of my clients, they always want to see it the other way, and wish there was a way that I could set my default to have it be standard instead of basic.
Yeah, it doesn't really have defaults built into that viewer as far as when you're looking at it online. The 360 Viewer app may have a set of defaults, but I'm not sure about that. And have you ever had anyone that wasn't able to look at the standard, or have they all been able to open that up just fine?
Everybody's been able to do it, but I'll email them and I'll give them instructions how to do it, and a lot of times they don't really understand what I'm talking about, and
I
so
understand.
I walk them through it. And it would be just so much nicer if I could just send this out in that view and just have them go to it, and then not have to change it every time.
I'll make a note of that, and we'll look into it and see if there's a better way that we can be approaching that.
Yeah, because I have literally never had a client that was not able to do the standard and had to use the basic. With internet speeds and even on phones and stuff now, everybody would much rather see it. And it's a night and day,
It is very different, yeah, when you don't have those textures. Well, I appreciate that feedback. That's good to know.
Okay.
We'll definitely look into it.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Bye.
Kayla, we have Gordon here with a question. Hi, Gordon. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you, Gordon?
Not too bad. So I had a question about using backgrounds, certain backgrounds in these 360 images. I've been trying my best to use a GoPro Fusion to take 360 images of outside the house so I can use that as, you know, you're inside. Is there a way, or maybe I'm just doing it wrong, of sizing the distance that it always feels like it's way too close to the windows for where it's actually taken from? And then it's like the start point. I don't know if it's just too conflicting for the program, or I could easily be screwing something up too.
You know, I have not personally done that. Do we have anyone on, any staff members who have worked much with those spherical or taken their own 360s? Adrian, do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, I've used it just a little bit. They're a little bit tricky to get a really quality scene to use for a backdrop. But I use on my phone, I'll take a 360 photo sometimes. You'll want to be in a really open space that doesn't have a lot of noise or other structures in it, or else it starts looking pretty funky. But I mean, as long as you can get a pretty quality spherical view, you can use that as a backdrop in chief and use those spherical settings. It works relatively well. It's just can be a little finicky. You can also do, if you have a panorama where you're just taking just a wider angle scene, you can use those types of backdrops and set those as spherical in the settings, and then you can change this field of view, which essentially changes the repeat of the number of times you'll see that backdrop occur while you're navigating around. So there's some tools. It definitely, I would suggest kind of playing around with the settings for that.
Right. Well, so the biggest issue that I run into, and I'm sure I'm not the only person, is if I use any of the, you know, stock or the bonus catalog images for backdrops that Chief lets you download, is, you know, trying to make it look as close to the yard that they're going to be looking out on, but, you know, inevitably there's like a car parked on the street or something that just looks weird when they're looking next to the swimming pool. So is there a way to determine where that image starts at? You know what I mean? Like, so when I'm swiveling around, it's rotating away. I don't even know how to word this. But is there a way to manipulate the backdrop image to stay in a certain orientation as I'm panning around the rooms?
So you're asking about adjusting basically the origin of where that image is going to start?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't, it could be totally shot in the dark here, but it's always been the last thing that I'm doing, and it's a pain in the butt, but if there's no way around it, there's no way around it.
My hunch would be that that's probably within the image itself. You can probably adjust, basically recrop it so that it starts in a different spot. But I definitely am going to write that down and we'll take a look at it. I don't believe there's not an option in Chief Architect, as far as I'm aware, to adjust where that image is going to start. It's going to kind of just take whatever the image is doing. But I'll write it down and we'll see if we can work that in the future. Take a look how to manage those a little bit better.
Okay, awesome. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Kayla, we have Marissa Barlow. Hi, Marissa. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello. You have that issue just kind of pointing on the backdrops. Even the ones that we download seem to be really close for some of our renderings, and being able to adjust them or adjust where the baseline would be, so you can move it would be a cool. Sometimes to get away from that, I'll cross the glass just at like 60% so that it's a fogged look, so you don't even actually see the exact exterior, and that's kind of how I get around.
Yeah, there's a couple different things that are going on there with the image. And if I zoom way out on this plan, so we have a backdrop going, so I'm just going to zoom way out so you can kind of see what the backdrop is doing. When you rotate around and you're just doing a flat backdrop, so we're not talking about spherical ones, all it's doing is it's filling the screen. So when you're looking at backdrops that you're going to import, you can figure the way that the image is going to look, it's just going to put it at the bottom out to the edges and up to the top of however your camera is situated. So some of that is going to be resolution. Getting images that have a higher resolution is going to get rid of, you mentioned kind of some fog. If it's a little bit blurry, that probably just means that the image has a fairly low resolution, which is not going to import very well. And then some of that may just be finding an image that's a little bit more zoomed out. So you can see on this one, we have grass here at the bottom we're fairly zoomed in on, but the majority of the image that you're actually going to see when you're inside the home is sort of in this realm right here. And so when I'm importing an image, I'm focused specifically on kind of the upper 2/3 of the image, which is what you're going to notice most of the time inside the home.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps you at all, but that's usually what I'm focusing on.
My question was more about interior renderings. Do you recommend adding those adding lights to your ceiling for the physically based, or do you not do that?
So if I can, you're a little garbled, so I'm just going to repeat what I think you're asking. Are you asking about using the added lights here?
Yes.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, we do have an option here to add lights, and it's sort of just a glow within the room. With the physically based render, typically the added lights shouldn't be necessary, unless there's some dark area of the room where you're not going to be adding an actual physical light fixture and there's not a reason to. So sometimes that's a good kind of heads up for you that you probably should add another light fixture over there. But if you're just wanting to kind of show off an area that's a little bit shaded, maybe something like underneath this island, or off in a corner where the light's just not really hitting it very well, but you have some feature that you want to highlight, then that's the only time that I really use those added lights anymore. Previously, I used to use them a lot more, but anymore, I've found that they're not as much needed.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Kayla, we have Muriel with a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, hi. I kind of figured out my answer, but I was just wondering too, like with the lighting in the physically based model, I tried to do the 360, and it looks great when I'm in Chief. It kind of like everything looks shinier and more realistic. But then I exported it to 360 on the cloud, and it seems to look like just the regular rendering again. It doesn't look shiny anymore. Is there a problem? Or maybe I messed up. I thought I changed it. So
the only thing I can think is that maybe you switched over to standard before you exported it. I don't think there's even a way to change the rendering. Once you're in the export, you're not dealing with anything but the resolution. So it shouldn't be changing your rendering style.
So it's not that I messed up on the width and the height or something like that.
I don't think so, no. If it continues to happen and you've double checked that you have the physically based render checked, then send it into tech support, because maybe there's something that's going on in that plan when you go to export it. But my hunch is that maybe you swapped over your rendering technique before you exported.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, this looks great. Thank you so much. This is really easy. And I did send it in an email to somebody and it did work. So
good.
Working well. Thank you.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you.
Kayla, it looks like you've gotten to all of the questions at the moment. Were there any announcements you wanted to make?
Sure, let's take a look. We have some upcoming events. So starting on February 3rd, we are going to start our kitchen and bath, our next round of the kitchen and bath virtual training. If you guys are working in kitchen baths or interiors, this is a really great training for you to get really in-depth, learn more about how this is going to operate, different renderings and materials. It's going to go into a lot of those types of things. So again, starting February 3rd, it's 4 days, 4 hours a day. It's some really good intensive training. We do also have some on-demand training that you can purchase if you want to just be able to watch kind of at your leisure. And then we have some webinars coming up here. On Friday, we have a boot camp webinar that's coming up. This is a good one if you have not been in the program, if you're just opening it up and wanting to get started. Highly recommend this webinar so that you can learn more about it and kind of be off and running. And then we have automatic dimensions coming up on February 4th. So that's going to be exactly the same time, same place, and you'll be able to learn more about those automatic dimensions and maybe some features that are coming up in the next version. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for attending today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.